During Cacophony tells you you're back with the Power of Three podcast. I'm Kenny Smith, and the tune in the background confirms it's another Ninth Doctor adventure. And today we're putting the Deviant Strain under the microscope. What is the Deviant Strain, you may ask? Well, it was the fourth novel in the BBC new series Adventures range, published on the 8th of September 2005. With a cover by Henry Steadman. It was written by Justin Richards and featured the Ninth Doctor and Rose, as well as Captain Jack Harkness, and this of course was the first of the original novels to feature Jack. He also featured in Only Human by Gareth Roberts and The Stealers of Dreams by Steve Lyons, the other two books that made up the second wave of three novels. Let's take a look at the cover. We've got Chris and Billy on there. Billy wearing a photoshopped version of one of her tops. Instead of being red or pink, it's now been changed to a shade of light blue or purple. And in the background, we can see there's lots of snow and ice. It's a very cold looking cover. And in the bottom half of the picture, underneath the taxi logo, shall we call it, that orangey one designed by Insect, I think their name was. There's somebody on the icy tundra making their way towards some kind of base. We can see there's two sort of radio masts sticking up out of them. One's got satellite dishes on it, the other looks like a more traditional radio mast. What could it be? Will the back cover give us any further clues? Let's have a look and see. The Novorosk Peninsula. The Soviet naval base has been abandoned. The nuclear submarines are rusting and rotting. Cold. Isolated, forgotten, until the Russian special forces arrive and discover the Doctor and his companions are here too. But there is something else in Novorosk, something that predates even the stone circle on the cliff top, something that is at last waking, hunting, killing. Can the Doctor and his friends stay alive long enough to learn the truth? With time running out, they must discover who is really responsible for the Deviant Strain. Sounds quite ominous, doesn't it? I like it. If you're interested, you may not be aware of this, but this book was later reprinted as a paperback, and they removed the image of Billie Piper from it. This was after she'd left Doctor Who the following year, and her agent requested it, so we just had a picture of Chris Eccleston front and centre in a rearranged, slightly redesigned version of the original cover. Additional information, well, an unabridged audiobook was produced by the RNIB Talking Books back in November 2007, and it was read by David Thorpe, and it's available still to eligible RNIB members. There was also an audiobook edition which was published by BBC Audio via Audio Go, which was read by Stuart Milligan, and that was released on CD on the 2nd of August 2012. And it's also still available as an ebook, available via the Amazon Kindle store. So before we go on, why don't we hear an excerpt from the book? Why don't we hear the prologue? And this is going to be read for us by the aforementioned Mr. Stuart Milligan, although he pronounces it Stuart.
The day he died was the best of Pavul's life. They had agreed to meet on the cliffs, between the wood and the stone circle. It was bitterly cold, and his feet crunched into the frosted snow. The full moon reflected off the white ground, casting double shadows eerily across the landscape. Behind him, the brittle, leafless trees clawed up towards the cloudless sky. Ahead of him, the icy stones glinted and shone, as if studded with stars. And beside him, holding Pavul's hand, was Valeria. He hardly dared to look at her, in case the dream faded. It had to be a dream, didn't it? The two of them, alone, together at last. He did look at her, couldn't stop himself. Lost himself in her wide, beautiful smile. Watched her ice-blonde hair blown back from her perfect smooth-skinned face. Felt himself falling into sky-blue eyes. A dream. A nightmare. Her eyes widened, smile twisting into a shout, then a scream. Darkness wrapped around them both. A sudden glimpse of the shadowy figures shuffling towards them from the wood. Then hands clamped over their mouths. Bony, dry hands, as if the trees themselves were grabbing at them. The world turned as the two of them were dragged off their feet, twisted, carried shouting for help. Pavel's hand was snatched away from Valeria's. The last time he saw the girl's terrified face was as she clawed back at him, desperate to make contact again, desperate for help. A dark-robed figure stepped between them, blotting out his view. A black hood covered the head, face in shadow with the moon behind like a cold halo. The figure turned towards Valeria. The last thing Pavel saw was the blackness of another figure looming over him. The last thing he heard was Valeria's scream. Terror and horror and disbelief as she saw beneath the hood.
There you go, there's your starter for 10. Thanks to BBC Audiobooks for that. And you can still get this, it's an unabridged reading, and it's available from BBC Audiobooks in the Ninth Doctor Novels Volume 2 collection, which features The Deviant Strain, Only Human, and The Stealers of Dreams. The other two are read by Anthony Head and Camille Cuduri. So, there you go. If you want to hear more, you can pick it up from there. Now, you may recognise the name Deviant Strain because if you were buying Doctor Who merchandise back in the day when this 9th Doctor and 10th Doctor run was underway, you'll have seen the typeface on that. It's a slightly worn-looking, slightly militaristic one, which has the odd letter underlined here and there, and that is Deviant Strain. So yes, that's where clever Justin Richards got the name, and it features on so much merchandise, including of course the covers of these novels. So yes, a very, very clever way to subtly weave something in like that. I do love a good typeface. Serpentine's still a favourite ever since 1997, and it appeared on Tomorrow Never Dies, the James Bond film. Anyway, before we continue, let's have a second excerpt from the book, and this will give us our first scene in the TARDIS, featuring the regulars.
The TARDIS froze for an infinitesimal moment, caught between the swirling colors of the vortex. Then it flung itself forwards, sideways, and backwards through infinity. Despite the battering the outside shell of the TARDIS was taking, inside was quiet and calm. The central column of the main console was doing what it was supposed to do. All the right lights were flashing. Captain Jack Harkness was whistling, and all was well. Jack paused mid-whistle to press a button that really didn't need pressing, then resumed his rather florid rendition of Pack Up Your Troubles. The warning bleep was so perfectly in time with the beat that he didn't even notice it until he was halfway through the next chorus. Smile, smile, smile. Bleep, bleep, bleep. And then he was all action. At the console, checking the scanner and scrolling down the mass of information. Not a lot of it made sense, but he nodded knowingly, just in case the doctor or Rose came in. A warning? He checked another readout. Cry for help. Grinned. Damsel in distress, maybe. Probably best not to touch anything. Probably best to wait for the doctor. Then again, what the hell? The doctor arrived at a run, Rose in his wake. He was stern. She was grinning. What's the fuss? Rose asked. Just a distress call, Jack told her, moving aside as the doctor's elbow connected with his stomach. Nothing much. Happens all the time on the high frontier. Not like this, the doctor told him, not looking up from the scanner. This is serious stuff. As if in reply, the bleeping changed from a regular pulse to a violent cacophony. That shouldn't happen. Slowly, the doctor turned towards Jack. You haven't done anything stupid, have you? What, me? You think I don't know the standard operating procedure? There isn't a standard operating procedure, Rose reminded him. She was at the console now, too, straining to see the scanner. Here, let's have a butcher's. Oh, great. Distress call comes in and you want to open a meat shop. Shut it, you two, the doctor ordered. Someone's responded to the signal, so that's all right. Is it? Rose asked. Yeah, whoever it was will go and help. Sorted. They will? Jack asked quietly. Bound to. Morally obliged. They get first dibs. No one else will bother now there's been a response, will they? Automated systems broadcast for help. Someone responds, and they start streaming all sorts of location data and details. Signal strength's gone up 500%, probably using the last of their backup energy power. Though after so long, it'll be a waste of someone's time, I expect. I wonder who responded, Rose said. She was already turning away, dismissing the problem from her mind. Well, Jack said. Actually, the doctor's mouth dropped open. You didn't. He turned away as Jack started whistling again. You did. He was back at the scanner. They're getting pretty frantic now, thinking they're about to be rescued from whatever god-forsaken lump of rock they're stuck on. Well, they needn't think I'm going to... His voice trailed off into a frown. Morally obliged, Jack said quietly. Yeah, we should go and help, Doctor, Rose put in. Where are they? Some barren wilderness that's good for nothing, Jack suggested. The doctor looked up, smiling again now. It's Earth. Early 21st century. Jack nodded glumly. Told you so.
Now, of course, Justin Richards was the consultant and editor for these books at the time. So who edits the editors? Well, there's only one way to find out. Let's speak to the man who looked after this book and helped Justin out.
Hi, I'm Steve Cole, and I was the editor of Doctor Who, The Deviant Strain by Justin Richards.
Welcome back, as always, Steve. Now, you had written The Monsters Inside, one of the first Ninth Doctor books, so how did it feel going from being a hired hand to editing one of these novels?
It was nice to be editing Justin again. Obviously, I edited him on past Doctor Adventures and Eighth Doctor Adventures, and we were very good friends and met socially, and, a bit like Terence Dix and Barry Letts, we'd meet once a month or so for lunch, drink, and would occasionally have days out together with our families. And it was lovely that Justin included me, along with Jack Rayner, as part of the writing team for the tie-in novels for the new series of Doctor Who when it came back. So in 2004, we all three went along together for meetings with Russell T. Davies and the script editors of the show, the creative team, to discuss how the books would work, how they would really be a part of the TV show and accurately reflect them. And so, having written one, The Monsters Inside, Justin did ask if I wanted to write a second one. I was super busy at the time with my own book, so I said no, which was financially a very foolish thing to do indeed, because those books, for the first time in a long time, they earned out their advance very, very quickly and brought in a lot of royalties, so that was all very exciting. But I was very happy to be editing Justin. He always wrote a good yarn, and I loved the setting in Russia of the Deviant Strain. It felt very big and very cinematic and very where the new series was going. There's a good alien race. It's having a terrible effect on humanity. It's a really good fun adventure from Justin. But certainly editing him was, an enjoyable process as always. By then, I'd been editing him at Simon & Schuster on his Invisible Detective range of novels. And of course, he'd been editing me on the Doctor Who's that I had turned out for him. So it was second nature, pretty much, to be tucking into a Justin Richards story, and always good fun.
Fantastic, thank you. Steve, could you maybe give us a wee idea as to what a book editor would do on a Doctor Who novel at this time?
The editor would have much more input into the structure and overall pace, tempo, and tone of the piece. The initial ideas would be discussed between us and then given to, back then, it was script editors like Helen Rayner who would look over them and feed back with comments from the production team. And so then Justin would go away and write, and when he delivered it, I would basically, as I do with all the books, would be questioning the sense of things, the inner logic of things, the pace of things, if an explanation needed to be brought out more, if something needed to be cut and something added into its place, basically making notes and comments and thoughts and coming up with an overall editorial guidance. That was what we did for each other. And because we knew the way that we would write, it was always very light-hearted. There were never any arguments or issues. We both took kindly to the red pen, and because we respected each other's opinion, we would basically just act on what they said. So yes, during that whole process, it was great fun.
And finally, Steve, were you surprised by how well these books did, given that Doctor Who books went from selling a few thousand to suddenly being everywhere in every major supermarket and bookshop?
I think the success of the novels took us all by surprise. They've been running for a long time and sold very steadily. But with it back on TV, suddenly everything went stratospheric. There wasn't an awful lot of merchandise out for that first season. I think perhaps people were holding back to see how it went. Back in 2005, or in the run-up to that, it must have seemed like an enormous punt, something that hadn't been all that popular in the late 80s, bringing it back all this time later. Other reboots hadn't worked. So the three initial novelizations, The Stone Rose, The Clockwise Man, and of course The Monsters Inside, they were about the only things with the Doctor Who logo on. And when kids went out looking for their Doctor Who fix in between Saturdays, they grabbed hold of them and sales went through the roof. I remember opening the royalty statement for Monsters and thinking that a mistake had been made. So it's very exciting times, because we'd been writing for a while, but to a limited audience, and suddenly that audience had opened up into children and teens and adults, all wanting to read Doctor Who stories in print, and there weren't many around. So they grabbed those ones they found on the shelves. It was really lovely. It was just like being back in the 70s for me, running into W.H. Smith's, looking for the latest Target. We were able to carry on in that tradition with the books flying off the shelves. So yeah, happy times. And Justin, of course, yes, did a lovely job working with a whole bunch of different authors, curating this lovely collection of Doctor Who fiction.
If you were a reader of Doctor Who magazine back in those early 2000s, or mid-2000s technically, you may remember that this book was officially announced in DWM 357. And here's how the book was revealed, and this is read for us by James Hadwin Bennett.
Hardback for more. 3 more hardcover Doctor Who novels have been confirmed by BBC Books for September, all featuring the 9th Doctor Rose and Captain Jack. The titles are The Deviant Strain by Justin Richards, Only Human by Gareth Roberts, and The Stealers of Dreams by Steve Lyons.
Lovely stuff. Of course, DWM would later do a full preview of the books and this whole wave, not just Deviant Strain. And Justin Richards spoke to David Darlington for issue 361 of the magazine, and courtesy of James, here is how that interview sounded. The first set of 9th Doctor books released back in May seem to have taken off in a big way.
They're still doing well. They've been in the top 10 hardbacks for, months. Even now, they're still selling over 1,000 copies a week.
Were you expecting that? Or has the success taken you by surprise?
We knew it was likely to be quite big, partly from having seen some of the series and having the confidence in that product, and partly because the sales pick up when Doctor Who is on the telly. And shops like Waterstones, for example, were hugely enthusiastic. One of their children's buyers actually gave us a presentation on what they were looking for from Doctor Who books, which I've never known happen before. And we'd sold the entire print run before we started. We had to go to reprint before we'd even published.
Did the news that the Doctor was changing complicate things for you? Did you ever think you might not want to release more Ninth Doctor books once the regeneration had been transmitted?
No. We were keen to do something in September. That's when you have to publish to hit the run-up to Christmas. And the only option really was more Ninth Doctor novels. And by setting this run of books between episodes 10 and 11, it meant that we could include Captain Jack, who's such a terrific character.
I get the impression that the 3 new books have been aged up a little from the first set.
It's not deliberate, but we're conscious of that to the extent that we're making sure that we don't age them up in the sense of losing the younger readers, because we very much want to keep those. These aren't children's books, but they absolutely have to be accessible to the older children who are watching the programme.
So is the pattern established that you'll keep doing these as sets of 3 roughly every 6 months?
It gives the marketing people an opportunity to present them to the trade, and gives the booksellers a bigger thing to push. We wouldn't have got a TARDIS dump bin into every branch of Waterstones in the country if we'd only had 1 novel coming out. Doing all 4 together, including monsters and villains, meant that we could make that an attractive option. And we were sensible enough to make sure that the TARDIS was the right size and shape to hold CDs and DVDs too.
Why have you selected the particular writers this time? Last time, it had to be kept more or less in-house.
We did keep it fairly internal this time as well, I suppose, in that Gareth was already in the loop doing DWM's comic strip, which was lovely, because Gareth is one of the old Virgin era writers I've wanted to lure back for ages. His unique, quirky take on things and accessible prose style are ideally suited to the new series, which is why DWM's been wise enough to involve him already, of course. Steve Lyons is someone I felt could handle the emotional content, who has a good working history in Doctor Who and a track record with other tie-in novels, so I knew he could pick up the characters of the Doctor and Rose quickly. I also know Steve edits well. He'll take editorial criticism when it's given, and he can work to schedule, which is crucial because there are extra levels of approval to go through at every stage. The easiest thing would have been to go back to Steve Cole and Jack Rayner, which, to be honest, I would have done if they hadn't been busy with other things. But it's nice to have that depth of talent available.
And what's the position on using the Ninth Doctor again in the future?
Yes, he's a bit of a problem because he's not really a past Doctor in the old brand sense, but equally he's not the current Doctor. So we'll give him a rest in 2006, and by 2007 we'll have a better idea of whether he fits into the past Doctor range, or whether we do a new range of books which are branded as new series, but which are about an old Doctor. That's a decision we'll have to think carefully and talk to Russell about. I'm sure he'll have an opinion that's worth listening to.
There we go. Typical Justin. Talking about others, but not his own work. But there we go. So, what did the reviews say about it? Let's now jump into Doctor Who Magazine issue 362, where Matt Michael was on the reviewing desk. Matt writes, "Gone but not forgotten. Though he may have been replaced in the final moments of the last series by David Tennant's Time Lord, the Ninth Doctor lives on in these 3 novels. As with the previous Ninth Doctor books, these 3 new adventures, Only Human, The Stealers of Dreams and The Deviant Strain, all successfully reproduce Christopher Eccleston's performance, transferring his cocky, blokish portrayal straight onto the page. That's not the only way in which these books resemble their predecessors, and the TV episodes that inspired them. But, given that 5 authors have now tried their hands at writing the Ninth Doctor without fumbling the job, it bodes well for potential further novels. Recognising the physicality of Eccleston's performance, all 3 writers continually describe what the Doctor is doing, be it checking his watch for the year, slipping one arm around Rose, or frantically using the sonic screwdriver to seal one of the monstrous Hybractors inside their cell. This, combined with a good ear for the Doctor's defensive sarcasm and moral outrage, really makes the printed page Ninth Doctor come to life. Sadly, this is more than can be said for Rose and Captain Jack. Though she features prominently in all three novels, it is only in Only Human that Rose really gets a chance to shine. In comparison, she gets relatively short shrift in the Deviant Strain, in which she plays the role of a traditional companion, that is, until she gets chased by monsters and screams a lot, and in The Stealers of Dreams, which, amusingly, sees her lose her marbles for much of its length. Jack fares even less well. Though he gets to wear some suitably outrageous costumes, including a sailor suit and some PVC fetish trousers, and drops even these when he needs to distract the army, Jack is pretty much sidelined through Only Human. All three novels make the most of Jack's military background, but it is Justin Richards' The Deviant Strain that plays most with this element of Jack's character. Unfortunately, it forgets that he's also a raffish scoundrel, with an eye for the ladies, gentlemen and space aliens, and a wisecrack for every situation. In The Deviant Strain, Jack gets all the heroic moments, leading the monsters away from the Russian soldiers, saving a sick girl and rescuing Rose, at the expense of him becoming a disappointingly bland action man, not far removed from some of the less interesting companions of the past. This fits, though, with the general feel of The Deviant Strain. The previous Ninth Doctor books were clearly written to mimic the style of the new TV series. That's less true of these novels. Their prologues are more reminiscent of old Doctor Who, which generally began with a hapless extra being bumped off by an unseen something, than the TARDIS scenes that kick off the new episodes. In The Deviant Strain, we have a classic old-school Doctor Who beginning as two teenagers from the Siberian town of Novorosk are hunted down by something horrible that sucks their life force away, leaving them as deflated husks. As the novel unfolds, it touches on all the old cliches of Doctor Who. There is an isolated base under siege from blobby monsters, an underground spaceship, a spooky stone circle, and lots of anonymous soldiers who can be picked off, one by the vampiric creatures lurking in the fog and shadows. Given how keen he is to evoke the style of the old series, it's hardly surprising that Justin Richards casts Rose and Jack in the roles of traditional Doctor Who companions, as an experiment to see whether the characters of the new series can be placed in stock situations of the old. The Deviant Strain almost works. Sadly though, it feels like one of the more soporific six-part stories of the past, and consequently becomes an uphill struggle to finish. Although they are clearly informed by the new series, these three novels don't seek to slavishly reproduce every element of the programme. For example, Jackie Tyler makes only a fleeting appearance, and the familiar locales of Space Station and Council Estate are swapped for alien planets and Russian wastelands. There's fun to be had spotting the obligatory Bad Wolf references, and the psychic paper is produced once too often, but, on the whole, these Ninth Doctor books feel more adventurous than the earlier novels, keen to push the TARDIS crew into new times and places while retaining the style of the show. Those who complained that the previous novels were targeted at a younger audience should also find something to please them within these books. Though it's the weakest, The Deviant Strain still has much to recommend it, particularly to readers who enjoy old-fashioned chills. Alongside the earlier novels, there is now a pretty impressive canon of work for the Ninth Doctor that suggests that, given half a chance, there's plenty of mileage in the character yet. Fantastic. There we go. Thank you for that, Matt. Now, before we have a look at what people currently think of this book, let's have another excerpt from the novel, again, courtesy of BBC Audiobooks, and read by Stuart Milligan.
20 years abandoned and forgotten out here, even with the base. They? I'm sorry. You said they, the doctor replied. As if you think we're not from this community dockyard institution village, whatever we settle on calling it. You're not dressed for this climate, the soldier said. Neither are you, Jack pointed out. You aren't equipped for near-Arctic warfare, are you? Khaki is no camouflage out here in the snow, and I bet you haven't winterized your weapons. The soldier's eyes narrowed as he regarded Jack. You speak like an American. Thanks. It wasn't a compliment. Russian, the doctor murmured, just loud enough for Rose to hear. Then louder. "So what brings you to the Novrosk Peninsula, Colonel?" "I have my orders." "Yeah, well, we've got ours, too. You think you've been yanked out here at short notice. You should see what happened to us." Rose could see the soldier tense slightly as the doctor reached inside his jacket. He kept the movement slow and careful, grinning to show that he meant no harm. When he withdrew his hand, Rose could see that he was holding a small leather wallet. He opened it out to reveal a blank sheet of paper. Psychic paper. It would show the person looking at it whatever the doctor wanted them to see. "Like I said, we've got our orders." The soldier nodded slowly, reading the blank page. "I hope you don't expect me to salute, Doctor. I'm sorry. Your thumb is over your name." "Yeah." The doctor stuffed the wallet back inside his jacket. "Right. This is Rose Tyler, my number 2, and Captain Jack Harkness here is from Intelligence." Jack was grinning too. "You don't need to know which branch. I'm sure you can make a very good guess." The doctor clapped his hands together. "So we're all mates then, eh?" His smile faded. "And no, there's no need to salute, just so long as you do what I need you to do. Then we won't get in your way. Fair enough." "So, who are you then?" Rose wanted to know. The soldier had turned and was gesturing to his men. The rifle snapped up, and the soldiers turned and started to move slowly and carefully across the cliff top. Some were heading for the stone circle, others towards the wood. "You seem to have been as well briefed as we have," the soldier said as he turned back. "I am Colonel Oleg Lievin. Like you, we are here to investigate the energy spike the satellite picked up. Like you, I would rather not be here. So perhaps we can make this as quick and easy and as straightforward as possible."
There we go. Thank you for that, Stuart. And as I said, still available from BBC Audiobooks as part of a 3-pack with the 2 other novels in this particular wave. So, let's go to Goodreads, where the book has a rating of 3.56 from 2,182 ratings and 184 reviews have been posted. Of these, 5 stars, 20%, 4 stars, 29%, 3 stars, 36%, 2 stars, 11%, and 1 star, 1%. Let's start with a nice, jolly 5-star review from Katie Brock. "I always liked Justin Richards' books for Doctor Who because they're just a little bit darker, and that makes for great reading. This one follows the Doctor, Rose Tyler, and Captain Jack Harkness in early 21st century at an abandoned Soviet base after the Cold War. There's Russian soldiers, zombies, jellyfish aliens, and bodies with the life sucked out of them. What's going on, and can the Doctor save the day? I did forget that Jack wasn't immortal because he was travelling with the 9th Doctor, and once I remembered, his near-death experiences were a lot more dramatic. Oops, sorry Jack." Although his compassion toward one of the victims was lovely, there was no flirting, just genuine care. I flew through this book, like I always do with Doctor Who novels. Nice to continue with the 9th Doctor's adventures in the form of written fiction. 5 out of 5 stars. Really enjoyed. 4 stars from Kyle Theobald. "A good old-fashioned creepy base under siege story, something which Doctor Who does best. You've got all the classic ingredients here: abandoned Russian naval base, remote isolated village, research lab with nefarious goings-on, slithery creatures that drain human life force, and Chekhov's decommissioned nuclear missiles. True, there's nothing especially groundbreaking or original in this book, but I'd argue with a story like this, there doesn't really need to be. What it accomplishes really well is the foreboding atmosphere and gradual ramping up of tension to a dramatic high-stakes climax with a high body count." I saw another reviewer on here complaining about the absence of Captain Jack's usual flirtatiousness, but honestly, I prefer the more toned-down, subtle characterisation, and would argue it fits with the overall grim tone of the story. All the regular Doctor Who cast I actually found to be well portrayed in the book. only knocking off a star because some of the technobabble explanations that come later on of what's going on don't make all that much sense if you overthink it. There's 3 stars from Dark Draco. Good name. Dark Draco says, "Another quite enjoyable adventure in the Doctor Who universe, with some suitably gory moments and scenes to make you shiver with excitement and terror. I liked the whole premise of the story, although didn't quite understand how none of the villagers could have been in on it too. Without giving too much away, I'm sure they would have queried the age of their local policewoman at least a few times. And a couple of plot twists were quite easy to spot. But that said, by suspending belief and pretending that this parody of Russia was realistic, I was able to enjoy the read and could see the TV actors running around solving this problem, just like they do on screen." There's 2 stars from Cassie Hamilton. "This is probably the worst Doctor Who book I've read, and I've read the lot of them now. Richard seems to have little concept of the Doctor, Rose or Jack as characters. His storyline lacks focus and direction. His efforts to build suspense are misguided and frustrating. As short as this book is, it took me ages to read. There are so few Ninth Doctor books. It makes me really sad to know that this is one of them." Oh dear. And finally, here's a 1-star review from Fangs for the Fantasy. "I love Doctor Who with a ridiculous passion, but that being said, this book left so much to be desired. Because Eccleston was only the Doctor for a short time, these stories are precious. After all, who doesn't want a bit more of the fantastic? Unfortunately, this book is almost painful to read. It's a scant 256 pages, and yet felt like a tome that was never going to come to an end. This is the first of the Doctor Who books that I almost gave a DNF rating. That'll be did not finish. When the Doctor, Rose and Captain Jack arrive, they discover one young man dead and his girlfriend Valeria drained of her youth. She is nothing but a husk, with no ability to communicate and absolutely incapable of taking care of herself. Because this is not the first time something like this has happened. Townsfolk have become suspicious and actually blame Verdalg, a vampire from Russian folklore. That sounds interesting, doesn't it? Naturally, it cannot possibly be Verdalg, as we discover when the Doctor begins investigating. Nope, it's all about aliens, glowing blue blobs and zombies. It seems some people decided that they want to live forever. The story takes a massive turn and feels like a bad rip-off of Stephen King's Tommyknockers. Since King already told this story, and brilliantly at that, inserting the Doctor does nothing but remind us that we're reading an author with less than half the talent of King. The story quickly turns from an intelligent investigation to the Doctor, Rose and Jack running from the blue blobs and setting shit on fire. Actually, you can't do that because it doesn't burn, but you mean stuff. Okay, not exactly literal poo. That's when it absolutely lost me, because it felt like a complete bait and switch. Yes, I get that as much as the Doctor is a super brilliant Time Lord, he spends a good deal of time running and dodging to get away from the bad guys, and that usually comes with a coherent story, which the Deviant Strain greatly lacked. In terms of characterization, it was absolutely off. Yes, I can picture Captain Jack running into combat and working to save someone he saw as vulnerable and in need of his help. My question, however, is where did my smiling, flirtatious Jack go? He is absolutely generic. Even though the Deviant Strain is set before Torchwood, there still should be some sense of who Captain Jack is. This character is such a cardboard cutout with no personality that he really could have been anyone with the name Captain Jack tacked on for fan service. Then there's Rose, who runs around tossing herself at anything that looks dangerous. She's like a fish out of water. I didn't recognise her at all. She seemed to be there so that the Doctor could explain what is going on. Yes, I realise that this is the main function of the companion in the Who universe. However, each companion has a personality that is distinct. Rose just ran and threw herself at stuff without trying to figure out the big picture, or even giving the Doctor a sense of humanity, which is something that she was really good at. Oh dear. Not a fan then, thanks for the fantasy. Hopefully you enjoyed the other books. Well, there we go, we've come to the end of another episode. If you've enjoyed what we do, feel free to leave a review wherever you get your podcasts from. If you want to follow us on social media, we're at Power of 3 Pod on Twitter. We're at Finished Zine on Blue Sky, and we have a Facebook group as well. So feel free, come along, like us, follow us, and do the needful. So now it's time to head off, and given that the story has a Russian setting, I was tempted to play something by Tattoo, but they're slightly rude. So instead, we're going to go with the Russian-inspired Tetris by Dr. Spin. Yes, I know it's Andrew Lloyd Webber, but hey, this tune will be stuck in your head for days now. So, until next time, I've been Kenny Smith. Bye-bye.
I know you're going to dig this.